in this video, I want to continue some of the conversation that we've been having about accelerationism. If you watched the last couple of videos, we did a little two-part series on the way in which accelerationism can be used as a negative strategy against K teams. And so in this video, I want to talk a little bit about how I think critical teams can respond to accelerationism. This is a type of like argument or a debate that I see between arguments that has gone a lot of different ways. And I think that you don't really see it as often as usually a critical team trying to respond to accelerationism as a negative criticism. But I think that because of the upcoming water resolution and the way in which I think how people respond to things like questions about technology and the way in which they use and think about the future and its relationship to the environment are really central questions for how you kind of like frame responses to the resolution, at least like for some critical areas. And so I think that being able to have like an in-depth understanding of this debate and really understanding the possibilities and places that it could take you is like extremely important in order for you to have like a really well-rounded idea of what you should be doing going towards like each portion of the flow. And so in this video, I want to do a little bit of just like helping you understand and set your priorities against a lot of the types of arguments that accelerationism makes and specializes in, and then I want to help you start thinking about the way in which you could be building framing and thesis arguments that can give you the most flexibility for whatever type of critical argument that you want to read, which will set up a lot of the conversation that we have in the next video and the videos after. In order to talk about maybe what some of the priorities are against this type of argument, I think the first thing is setting up what the framing of the competition is going to be against the alternative. I think on both sides is a really important portion for like any type of K on K debate in general, because I think that in these types of scenarios, figuring out like the basis for like what the justification of a permutation or what the justification for a vote of the affirmative over the alternative or what presumption all these other kind of terms mean and how the judge should be evaluating them is really important for you to like get an idea of what places you can and can't make arguments and like what arguments like are being kind of agreed upon as like the field, right? And so I think that when you're making your type of framing argument against accelerationism specifically, I think that you need to make arguments about how the idea that the future should be confined to one political option is necessarily bad and like kind of repeats a lot of the violence that is securitized by the status quo, is that we can kind of only see one linear progression for how we should move towards the future, and that kind of being like faulty in the way in which we think about like the progression of not only time but its ability to be something that we use as like a creative tool beyond the types of violences that it imposes now. And I think that from a lot of different critical perspectives there are really interesting ways to make this type of argument for framing your stuff. But I think in a world where you're kind of like deciding to take a more like pessimistic route to how you want to think about the type of argument you want to make against accelerationism, I really think that then your framing arguments need to take like a hard up just kind of response of being like this should be a debate between like pessimism and futurism as like ideologies for how we like craft what we should think about as that kind of like move forward or as we live through the world, and like just centering it on like a really strong impact turn debate and taking it up head of there, because I think that the things that both of these interpretations accomplish, even though they do things very differently, is that they kind of like set the opening kind of idea for where you're probably going to be placing a lot of your offense and like specialists and like the where you're kind of gonna like spend a lot of time developing your most crucial pieces of offense. But it also opens a space for like the contestation of like that the negative team also wants to center on, i.e. the negative it is probably hard for the negative that's really accelerationism to win, that there's only one type of like singularity that we should build towards in order to understand a change in which we understand the future now, right? I think that that would be like a much harder line to win than some of the arguments that you can be made in terms of like what the future should be in terms of like opening up and then differently in the way that it is now. And then on the other side, I think that when you're kind of like forcing a team to really just take up this impact turn debate, that's probably where a lot of like their link arguments, etc., are going to be anyways. And so it really just simplifies the debate into one line of arguments that you kind of need to answer, even though it may feel like for them that they're getting access to a lot of the arguments that they wanted to make anyways. I think that additionally, when you're kind of like then transitioning from trying to think about how you should be framing the debate as like these interpretations, you need to think about like how you're going to justify them through various net benefits. I think that when you're trying to figure out the types of net benefits that you should be reading, I think both sides will be reading arguments about like why they access things like being able to produce revolutionary education better. But I think that you should create specific arguments about like why these kind of like clear lanes of clash for how we should think about like the role of opening up the possibility for collaborations between like different visions of the future, etc., as important, can be a way that you kind of add nuance to the way in which you like make your revolutionary education claims that not only make them more specific to debate, but also set up net benefits that you're going to want to make later on when you're getting to places like your permutation, and you can kind of start to hint at some of these connections for what you want your framing arguments to accomplish in the eyes of the judge. And then additionally, I think it allows you to contest with the negative, because in order for them to refute your interpretation, they also have to close themselves off from the possibility of using like the benefits of the debate in the way that you're discussing, which I think can be like just overall really advantageous way for you to like build more offensive arguments when having to deal with their net benefits and the interpretations that they'll kind of be providing for the debate. I think that then when you're kind of moving on to the more like thesis portion of the debate, it's really important in order to like I think really build either a version of your strategy depending on like what your stance is on futurity to kind of frame how you want to deal with the particular nuance of accelerationism when it's read as like a more kind of like closer to traditional like capitalism type of critique. I think that when you're trying to figure out how you kind of want to contest with like the most important or crucial portion of the thesis, you want to generally think of, okay, what is my stance on futurity per the 1AC? Does the 1AC say that we have control over the future at all? Does the 1AC say that we need to envision like particular types of futures that we can move towards them? Does the 1AC that the future is something that is like never guaranteed or like able for us to like kind of access, and so we should kind of like refuse it in favor of something pessimistic? What is the 1AC stance towards that idea? And then once you take that, use that as kind of the central place for how you frame the points of offense against the thesis for the judge. I think in a place where you kind of want to contest and just say that you and the alternative kind of have different versions of what the future should look like, then you may want to say that it's not a question of being able to win that any one particular future is presumptuously correct, but that the negative should have to win, that the affirmative version of the future is worse than the type of future that's accessible in the status quo, because that is kind of the burden that you should have, not just that in relationship to the alternative, because then you can kind of build justifications that just saying that the alternative is another version of the future that can be possible without winning like ample trade-off, that doesn't allow the justification for a negative ballot, which I think kind of like raises the threshold for the negative in order to have like much stronger permutation arguments that are built into like these like nitty-gritty dissents, I think, that are harder to make than just relying on like presupposed kind of framing arguments, because every time you're able to win any of those framing arguments before, not only is it helping you kind of like make your thesis arguments like more valuable in terms of the way that you're framing your response, but it's also able to kind of help you create a way of thinking about the debate that allows you to really connect the dots as you go out the flow from your framing to your thesis to your alternative. And then when I think you're taking that maybe more like pessimistic explanation of your relationship to futurity, I think that setting up just a thesis portion of debate in a place where you really start off a lot of this impact turn debate and develop a lot of examples into explaining why like the futurity is something that is like this kind of like cool optimistic promise, or as something that is kind of framed as like infinitely accessible only so that we can like brush off the kind of like ways in which the current way in which we live life as a whole is unethical, as places where you can kind of like situate your offense for like how you want to make these early on debates simpler, so that when you get to the linked debate, it feels like the amount of time that you've spent really digging into the thesis is valuable beyond just like that, like what would feel like maybe like a long overview or something like that, because it's really the central portion of where the debate is kind of happening. Hopefully this video is helpful for you, and hopefully you'll tune into other videos that I'll be doing talking about accelerationism in a way I think people can respond and execute it. And yeah, thanks for tuning in.